everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of our making a cozy blanket. This is part 2 of making your favorite hoodie from a cozy blanket. So if you didn't catch part 1, making the pattern and copying your favorite hoodie, go check out this video right here. We can get right into part 2. And this guy's just having a bath here. So this is my fashion studio. My name is Faren. Oh, do you think that's cozy? Oh, it's cozy. It's a very cozy 100% baby alpaca blanket, and it's Pluto approved. Make sure to stay until the end so you can learn all about how to enter to win one of these amazing blankets. This tutorial is just going to be a basic overview of how to cut a stripe. This is not so much in detail. Don't worry, in the future I will be making a cut it out part 2 for prints and plaids and stripes. Let's get setting this blanket out. I want the big blue stripe to go right down the center here. So what I'm going to be doing is placing my pattern where I want it. My pattern is place on fold. So I'm going to have to fold this blanket in half and matching my pattern, making sure that these lines match up with the width of my pattern. Okay, we're gonna start with the front. I do kind of like the red stripes, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip over my pattern. I'm just setting up my piece to be as close as to the edge as possible. So you can always mark your pattern. I line my pattern piece up right at the bottom of that stripe. And I'm just marking where the big blue stripe is, so it's easier to match on the back pattern. Ideally, you would want to fix all of your pattern pieces so you can see all of your pattern pieces done and on the fabric. You can always move them around so you can waste less fabric. But because I'm limited with my space here, I need to do it piece by piece. Okay, so next you're putting your weights down. I don't suggest using pins because this is kind of like a thicker fabric, so your paper might buckle or pucker. Pro tip right here, try not to move your pattern when you're cutting. You have it only with weights, okay? So you want to be moving your scrap fabric away from you. Try not to do this when you're cutting. Like little snips, like long strides, holding your scissors to the floor or the tabletop. Okay, piece number 1. It's done. Before you move your piece, we're just gonna check for our notches and we're going to notch those. In this type of fabric, because it is a little more open weave and is really thick, what you could also do is do a tailor's tack with a needle and thread for your notches. The notch in the armhole is probably the only notch that is important. It's for setting your sleeve into place properly. Your front armhole has one single notch and your back has a double notch. The other notch that is, second important is your center front notch. We can move on to cutting the back. We're indicating the stripe on the back pattern piece, so we know where to place it when we're placing our back pattern piece. Clear? All right, cool. So I'm just sort of putting some lines on my pattern, both sides of the pattern if it happens to get flipped over. That's it. Now we need to move all of our crap out of the way. We're just lining up the big blue stripe. I also lined up the hem with this end of this stripe here, so that makes it really easy. We're just doing the same thing that we did from the front to the back. Beauty, let's cut this. Cut and tailor tack your notches. That's it. Sleeve stripes, sleeves with stripes. I think it only really matters where your stripe on your sleeve matches the other sleeve. You don't want to have a red stripe down here and a red stripe up here. Matching stripes going this way from the body to the sleeve, very difficult. Because this is not a very distinctive pattern, you could cut your sleeve in two, if you want to do that. And then cut your sleeve out, and then you'll have perfect sleeves that match. One indication that you would want to take note of is where your sleeve edge is lined up with the pattern of your blanket. Also, you may want to check out the notch, the elbow notch, if you have an elbow notch, where it lines up on your pattern on your blanket. Like I said, the notches on your sleeve are very important to actually attaching your sleeve to the body. We're gonna be doing the last piece, the hood. Okay, the hood is done. I would hate for this fringe to go to waste. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be cutting this into a trim. So I'm just gonna be making about a 1/2 inch seam allowance from the edge and then cutting my fringe off the blanket. How cute is that? All right, we're gonna use this a bit later. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so we're here at the sewing machine. First things first, let's prep our pieces with the hem allowance that you're going to need by ironing up any hem allowance. That's basically the hood hem allowance. And then after you do that, we're going to be stay stitching our neckline and our armhole. When you're basting, remember that your stitch length is going to be at the highest number, like a 5 or a 6. So mine is a number 5. So the reason we do a stay stitch is because these pieces, because they're cut on the bias, a little bit of bias here, we don't want them to fray or to stretch when we're sewing other pieces. And so we're gonna do a stay stitch for the neckline and we're gonna do them for the armholes. So we're gonna turn on our machine. All right. And we're just gonna be basting this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The next step would be sewing the shoulder seams. What I'm suggesting is to use some sort of binding or cotton strips in order to stabilize those areas and also to clean finish the seam allowance. I have cut 1 1/4 inch cotton strips of just scrap fabric that I have. So I'm gonna be stitching the shoulder seam and this tape together all at a 1/2 inch. I'm putting this binding on the front side, stitching it, and then folding it over the seam allowance in order for the seam allowance to go towards the back. And that's where we're going to be top stitching it. Also, change your stitch length back to 3 or a 2.5. I'm gonna be trimming down this seam allowance, the seam allowance that's on the inside, which is basically the front panel. I'm trimming this seam allowance down by a 1/4 of an inch. So now this is a lot easier to fold over and to pin this area to the back. And then we just have to top stitch down here at a 1/2 inch. And I'm gonna be changing my stitch length to 4. The 2.5 and the 3 is a bit small for a top stitch. So it looks like that. This is the back side and this is the front side. All right, so we just have to do the other shoulder. Ha! Now we get to do the fun part, the sleeves. this is where I want to add that really cool tassel-y trim. I'm attaching this onto the sleeve seam. Can somebody pass me my trim? Thanks. We're going to be base stitching at 1/4 inch this trim where the sleeve seam would meet the armhole. So that's the whole cap here. It's my style, but maybe it's not yours. You can skip this step if you'd like. Okay, you might want to leave a tassel away from the seam allowance, if that makes sense. Basting stitch. Sewing machine on. Yes, I know, we haven't sewed the side seams yet. That's perfect, that's exactly what you want. You attach it to the body, and then we're gonna be sewing this whole seam here all together. It's the easiest way to put together any garment. Let's match our notches. The double notch goes to the back, and the single notch goes to the front. So we know that this is the correct sleeve to this side of the body. Pinning our notches, and we're gonna be stitching at 1/2 inch. Changing our stitch length from the basting stitch to a 2.5. Okay, so that's what it looks like. We're gonna be trimming down the seam allowance by 1/4 inch on the body seam allowance and not the sleeve. Gonna take it down. We don't want a super bulky seam to stitch over. I'm gonna top stitch it at 1/2 inch with a 4 stitch length, so the top stitching looks a lot bigger. Okay, this we know is the body, and this is the sleeve. So we're actually pushing the seam allowance this way so our trim naturally falls down. I just wanna make it clear, you know. And then what I'm doing is I'm just lining up this with the seam here. So the 1 centimeter line. Yes! Who wouldn't want to wear that? This is what it looks like so far. Cool, right? The next seam is going to be the underarm seam. So this seam right here. Right sides together, and I'm going to have to be conscious of my stripes, and when I'm sewing them, to just be conscious of how they're matching up. Look at those seams, so professional. How are we going to finish this seam? Actually, there's a few ways. One, you could baste stitch or stay stitch this seam together. This blanket in particular is a bit more open weaved. Zigzagging might actually pull the seam and make it all lettuce-like, like this. You can stitch the seam allowance over again, or you can serge it, or another way is you can bind it, stitch your binding together instead of top stitching it. I think I'm going to serge it. It looks friggin' fantastic. We have a few other things to do. We have the hood and the hem. I got hair in my mouth. And possibly a grommet. I also have a tutorial on how to install grommets, so you can go to that link right here. You can also check the link in the description below. Okay, let's move. I have taken the liberty of prepping my hems already. I have ironed them down. We're going to be sewing that center seam for the hood, like it's this way. So now that we've have our hood all stitched up, we're gonna add the grommets. To find the placement of the grommet, I am measuring up approximately 5 centimeters or 2.5 inches depending on what you're going for. You want to leave a good distance because, you know, the hood rolls down, it rolls over, you don't want it too close to the edge. So here's the folded edge of your hem. 5 centimeters is approximately here. Okay, here's the edge of my hood. And then I'm placing my grommet right at the edge, and then I mark on the other side of my grommet, just to find the placement. We have our grommets in. They look beautiful, right? I'm gonna be hemming all the way around my hood opening for the casing. We're gonna take this hood now and we're gonna put it into the body, matching the center front, right where the hood ends, right? We're gonna pin that down. And we're gonna go to the next one. Okay, so we've sewed the hood onto the body, and now we're just gonna finish the neckline by serging, and then we're gonna be top stitching. The seam allowance is supposed to go down towards the body. Yeah, so we're just gonna top stitch as we have been doing. All right, so let's get doing that. Finishing this garment, finally. We have a hem to do on the sleeves and on the body hem. Really, we're just moving our seam allowances towards the back, and then we're turning it up. I think that looks about 2 inches, so I'm making like a little 1/2 inch roll, and I'm just gonna top stitch it. The same goes for the sleeve. We finished our hems, and I have to say, you don't have to do it this way. You can do a ribbing. I just chose not to do a ribbing because I wanted that sort of flexibility of wearing it kind of like a coat. Now I'm gonna show you how to put in this drawcord. I'm using this thing called a Dobkin. You pinch the trim, and then you just slide this ring down, holds onto your trim for you, and then you just put this through, and this takes your trim all the way around your casing. There we go. Look at that. You can see the finished product here and here and here and here. That's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long project, but so worth it, right? I cannot forget that you can win one of these blankets. In order for you to win this, you have to follow me on Instagram, comment on this video, your Instagram handle, and tag one of your friends in the comments in Instagram. I'd have to say the value of this prize is like $300 US because it's 100% baby alpaca. And I brought these all from Peru. I will be picking a winner on December 25th. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. There's gonna be more Sew Sustainable gift projects to come. And I'll see you soon. Okay,